and almost many of the important subjects have been covered. But this is one of the very important topics because we usually come across it in daily life, and it's all about reflex epilepsies. And you know that the most common one is visual sensitive epilepsies or photosensitive epilepsies or whatever. Um, so we have our first speaker, Dr. Ajit Cherian. I don't think this crowd needs an introduction about Ajit because Ajit already had done one, and he's my colleague, my esteemed colleague, working with me. So versatile, so prolific, writes very good poems, dances, Lugi dance to Bharatanatyam to whatever you want, he will do that. That's the way it should be, not just clinging on to neurology alone. And I think he was with Ram and Neeraj, is it, Hadith?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I always used to hear this, like, I was very close to Ajit, and Neeraj and Ram was always sidelined by me and all. The same I'm hearing now also. That's okay, fine. So he's a wonderful speaker. So first we'll have Ajit, and he'll be speaking on visual sensitive epilepsy. So you have 20 minutes, but if you can stop short at 18 minutes, that will be wonderful. So over to Ajit.
Okay, thank you, madam, for the kind words. I think I'm audible, and I'll start. The topic is on visual sensitive epilepsy, and thank you once again for the kind words. And I'll start with this video. Can you all see this video?
Yes. Oh, disco dancer. You want to sing along with Mithun Chakravarti? I am a disco dancer.
Okay, I think all of you know this famous song, but what I want to convey is basically the photosensitivity which is imparted by the discotheque which is there behind Mithun. So a little bit on the history. Marshall Hall was the first person who had written about this one. But even prior to that, I think many centuries prior, even during the slave trade, the potter's wheel was used to identify the slaves who are sensitive to this kind of visual sensitive or photosensitive epilepsy. And Gogos initially made writing on the loud noise induced, and thereafter Clement, Gustard, and Tassinari are the three people who have done important work in this visual sensitive epilepsy. So these are the other names for the same: reflex or stimulus sensitive or triggered or sensory evoked epilepsy. So they all mean the same. So is there a definition? So the 1989 ILE says that these are epilepsies characterized by seizures with specific modes of precipitation, and they have few spontaneous seizures. So they don't define what is this few spontaneous seizure, but they should definitely have the specific modes of precipitation. So they have mentioned this also in the 2001 ILA classification. And what is the prevalence? So approximately 4 to 5% or up to 7% of the epilepsy patients in your clinic will be having some amount of reflex sensitivity or reflex induced seizure. And the majority belong to the idiopathic subtype, and a few are symptomatic or probably symptomatic. And among these reflex epilepsies, the most common is the photosensitive or visually sensitive epilepsy. So if you look at the classification of the stimulus or reflex sensitive epilepsies, the most important, as we have said, is a visual stimulus, could be flickering, pattern, or anything else. Like I'll come to the details. Then we have eating, somatosensory, startle, hot or cold water. I'll be telling something about the reading epilepsies also, because there actually the visual and the visual, it's basically a visual plus a cognitive aspect is there. Then the graphogenic, neurogenic, music and practice. So I'll limit myself to the visual and the reading. So they should have a specific precipitating stimulus, and there should be an EEG or a clinical consistent relationship must be recognized in this. Now, non-specific stimulus like sleeplessness, alcohol, or drug withdrawal are common precipitators. That is unanimous around any of the epilepsy spectrum. So they are not considered, and here there's a specific precipitating stimulus has to be there. Now it could be extrinsic. What could be this precipitating stimulus? It could be either extrinsic or intrinsic. The extrinsic can be very simple, like flashes of light, elimination of visual stimulus, or even tactile stimuli, or it could be something very complex like reading and reading or even eating. So the latency from the stimulus to the seizure may be very short in the simple seizure, whereas it may be very prolonged, even taking minutes in complex. The intrinsic stimulus can also cause seizures. So it could be something very elementary. So certain praxis or certain movements can elicit seizures. Sometimes it may be very elaborate, like nugeling, like thinking, calculating, using the Rubik's cubes, music, certain decision making. So these can elicit seizures. So the response should be either clinical or EEG. But there could be some cases where you may not have a conspicuous EEG thing. This is very usually seen in the video game epilepsy. So in the video game epilepsy, the relationship is difficult to document. And two reasons are there. I'll come to the details. One is because the frequencies that are involved in video game epilepsies are something to the tune of 50 hertz, which are not usually tested in now IPS, cortex stimulation. And the second reason is that they are more like chrome sensitive or color sensitive, which we are not testing. So these are the two reasons why video game epilepsy, the stimulus seizure relationship may be difficult to document in your console, in your VDEG console, in your EEG console. So in video game epilepsy, only 70% may have a photosensitivity to or PPR, photoparoxysmal response to intrinsic cortex stimulation. Now, there are certain terms that one needs to be very certain about before we go to the disease specific. One is fixation of sensitivity. So what is fixation of sensitivity? So this means that the abnormalities, that in the epileptic form abnormalities are elicited by eliminating of central vision or fixation. So central vision or fixation is actually eliminated, which precipitates the epileptic form abnormality. So it could be posterior or it could be generalized discharges. So these discharges occur as long as the eyes are closed, but not when the eyes are open. But when the eyes are open, actually you are fixating. You're automatically, your eyes will be fixating on something, and that eliminates the discharge. So in your VDEG console or in your EEG room, eyes closed is a good maneuver, or pressed and diopter spherical lens can be used for testing that, or Ganspin simulation. That's actually a homogeneous visual field. The white paper alone may not be useful. It has to be a homogeneous hemi-coffin like white sheet, hemi-coffin like white sheet without any markers, without any edges, so that the person is unable to fixate. So that is required to check for the fixation of sensitivity. Darkness is not a must for fixation of. Now, photosensitivity is something different from fixation of sensitivity. So testing for photosensitivity, it is tested with underwater goggles which are covered with black opaque tape in a dark room. So that is how we test for photosensitivity. Now this is one from the textbook that I have taken. The patient is closing the eyes, and immediately thereafter you can see that there is the penetrapolos are termed as larviform discharges. So small epileptiform discharges arise. So this is from one of our own patients. So the eyes are closed here, transiently it's open, and then here again the eyes are closed. And as long as the eyes are closed, you can see the small discharges which are happening. And there's a definite change in the background also. And as the patient opens the eyes, there is a change that is seen. So this is a classic fixation of sensitivity. Now, where do you find this one? This is usually seen in the benign epilepsy, occipital epilepsy syndromes, the penetrapolos and the gestalt type. These children are not photosensitive. So if you do a IPS stimulation, they may not evoke a PPR, photoparoxysmal response, but they may show a fixation of sensitivity. And during the period of fixation of sensitivity, if you give a high frequency cortex stimulation, it may in fact inhibit the occipital paroxysm. And the other classic symptom where you can have fixation of is G1, where eye closure and as well as eye close. Eye closure more than eye close will cause paroxysm of the discharges. And some patients with IgE can also show fixation. Now, what is photosensitivity? These are seizures or epileptic ophthalmitis which are elicited by complete elimination of retinal stimulation by light. So there is a total elimination of retinal stimulation. And this pure photosensitivity is in fact very, very rare. So most of the cases which have been described as photosensitive are probably fixation of sensitivity. This is from the Benedetto's review literature. Now one needs to know that almost all the patients with fixation of are also sensitive to complete darkness, because there you cannot fixate in complete darkness. So all patients with fixation of sensitivity will also show photosensitivity, but the reverse is not true. Now coming to the next point, what is photosensitivity? Now for photosensitivity, it is mediated through the central vision, or fixation of vision is a must. So central vision and visual fixation is a must for photosensitivity. That is because a critical neuronal mass in the occipital cortex has to be stimulated for photosensitivity. So it is only induced only if the patient looks at the center of the stroboscope or the stimulating surface, whatever it is. So even a partial shift of gaze from the center of the lamp to the edge deviates it by around 12 to 15%, and that in fact may inhibit the response. One should understand that the macula or the fovea has the maximum optical representation. So one has to really focus on the stimulating or exciting surface to elicit photosensitivity. Now, it is actually a genetically mediated entity, because in monozygotic twins, there's a 100% concordance. It is autosomal dominantly inherited, and age-relatedly reduced penetrance is there. So as time goes by, your chances of expressing this comes down, and the loci have been located at 6, 7, 13, and 16. And one gene has been recently identified, NEDD4, to see ubiquitin protein ligase, which has been implicated in some families with photosensitive generalized. Now, overall, because of the increased artificial light stimulation, and there has been an increased clinical manifestation of this phenomenology in the population. Now, if you look at this one, this is a classic, this is from our Galileo actually. So if you look at this EKG, you can see that the 18 Hertz is causing an artifact here, and it is actually eliciting a photophoresis response, which is sustained for at least 1 second beyond after the stoppage of the stimulus. Now, when you do a cortex stimulation, the eye closure period, that is the initial 3 seconds after attempting to close the eye, that is called the eye closure. That is the most sensitive during the intermittent cortex stimulation. That is because there's a filtering effect of the lid, and only those which enter the retina at that point, that is the maximum excitatory at that point. So this is one case from the textbooks, and this is one of our own case. You can see that the eyes are closed here, and the initial 2 seconds you can see that there's a the eye closure sensitivity, and eye closure sensitivity is also seen in this 20 Hz. So intermittent cortex stimulation also during the phase of eye closure is the maximum sensitivity. So what is the mechanism behind this photosensitivity? So in 1980 for Meldrum, and thereafter 20 years later, Wilkins postulated that there's a diffuse insufficiency of GABAergic inhibition as a mechanism. So there's a reduction GABAergic mechanism. And there are certain animal models in which this has been identified. There's a forme chicken, that is, which have a genetic mutation in the synaptic receptor glycoprotein 2A, as well as in the light sensitive baboons, Papio, where they have elicited this kind of photosensitivity by actually what they did was they reduced the GABAergic local GABAergism by injecting alloglycine injections in the occipital cortex. And that actually precipitated epileptiform discharges, which was then shifted anteriorly to the frontorolandic cortex. So definitely the reduction in the GABAergism is thought to be the mechanism. Whereas in progressive myoclonus epilepsy, it is thought to be due to the reduction in the dopaminergic transmission because apomorphine and agonist will inhibit the PPR. So what is the most important type of seizure? Most important one is actually myoclonus because it is actually a reflexive mechanism. So something comes to the visual field, there is a jerky kind of movement. So it's basically myoclonus. It could be eyelid myoclonia, maybe limb myoclonic jerk, anything may be elicited. So callosum is critical because there has to be interhemispheric synchronization and generalization of epileptiform discharge. Now, around 19 years later, thereafter, this has been proven by this article which came in Neurology in 2019. This has been a new molecule. They have just given the number. This PF, this 7-digit number is given. It is actually a positive allosteric modulator of the alpha 2/3/5 subunit of the GABA A receptor, and with minimal activity on the alpha 1 receptor. So it was actually increasing the GABAergic transmission locally, and that had a robust clinical efficacy in inhibiting the photosensitive epilepsy. So it may come as a future drug. And because it is not binding to the alpha 1, actually the benzodiazepine have a strong affinity to the alpha 1, which causes the sedative and which leads to the tolerance and the withdrawal side effect. So they are proposing that this allosteric modulator, which has more affinity towards 2, 3, and 5, and less affinity towards 1, may in fact may be the chemical of future in this kind of epilepsy. Now, in the common population, 1 in 4,000 may have PPR. So this is from the military recruitment and the naval and the aircraft recruitment study. And 5% of our common patients from the epilepsy clinic may also have photosensitivity. And majority are found in the idiopathic generalized, that's a JME. In childhood absence, actually they have given 18%, but in our practice we may not find that. So it may be because of a contamination with other JAE probably, which gives this high percentage. But also in symptomatic, like in West and LGS also, you can find up to 10 to 15% or even 18%. And symptomatic occipital lobe epilepsies up to 6% may have photosensitivity. Now, of these percentage, 42 will have pure photosensitivity. That means they will have seizures only precipitated by this cortex stimulation, and 40 may have a common, both reflex as well as spontaneous, and 18 may have fully spontaneous seizure. So as we have said, myoclonic jerk, abscesses, and GTCS are the prevalent type. So can you have, so if you look at this one, this is from the Binnie's article. So majority are myoclonic. It could be eyelid myoclonia, limb myoclonia, generalized myoclonus. You can have versive seizures also, like your head and eye versive movements. You can have absence, but it's low down in the disc, GTCS. And in fact, you can have TLE-like seizures also with limbic symptoms. Because from the occipital cortex, they are stimulated, but then it goes infraciliary towards the temporal and to the mesial temporal structures, giving like the limbic manifestations also. So all these subtypes have been described. Now coming to the last type, that is the pattern-induced seizure. So what all patterns are potentially hazardous? So if you have a luminance more than 20 candela per meter square, and the frequency of stimulation, if it is more than 3 Hz, it is thought to be highly precipitant pattern. This is by the consensus criteria group, because this group have given directives to the industry, that is the advertisement industry and the video game industry, to avoid patterns which may precipitate seizures. And if the area occupies more than 10% of the central visual field, so in a TV screen, if it is occupying more than 25% of the TV screen area, that is a potential hazard. And among the chromes, the saturated red and desaturation, transition from the saturation red is the most problematic and most stimulating. Now, if you have 5 pairs of dark light stripes, 5 pairs in any pattern, it could be vertical, it could be horizontal, it could be wavy, that can be a provoking. And the pattern has to be sustained in the visual field for more than or equal to 0.5 seconds. So these are the criteria. So red desaturation, occupying 25% of the screen area, luminance of more than 20, frequency more than 3 Hz. And if it is reversing or flashing, your pattern induced seizures are highest interest rather than a change in direction. So if a black becomes suddenly bright and the bright becomes suddenly black, so this reversal has the maximum tendency for causing a pattern induced seizure. And nearly all patients with pattern induced sensitivity will show PPR, but the reverse is not. Only 30% of patients showing photoparoxysmal response will show pattern sensitivity, but all will pattern sensitivity will show photoparoxysmal response. Now, if you have a pattern which is flashing or vibrating, then 70% of those who show photoparoxysmal response will show also pattern sensitivity. But in our VDEG cubicle, we may not be doing this vibrating or flashing pattern. So that is why we may not be able to elicit that. Now, pattern sensitivity without photosensitivity extremely rare, and both are genetically determined. So these are the things which are used in our VDEG console. Of this, the checkmate pattern is actually having the least potential. This is the test and one where it has been elicited. Now, this is one image which I have saw. Can anyone identify any figures within this image? If anybody can identify any figures within this image, they can just type or just unmute themselves and let me know.
Figure means you mean a picture or you mean a numerical figure?
Is there anything anybody can identify within this one?
You mean a photograph?
Anything.
Okay. Kalyani has already identified 2 houses. Manisha has identified 1 house.
2 houses.
Okay.
2 houses are, I think, obvious to everyone, no?
There's possibly a tree as well.
Okay.
Okay. Redu is saying 1 tree also. Good.
Okay. Okay. Did anybody find this discomforting, this picture?
I'm finding it so discomforting. Can you go to the next slide?
Yes, sure. When I searched for this, I got this uncomfortable images in art. So actually, this was something which was shown as the classic image which will discomfort a viewer. So intensely looking at this kind of uncomfortable images can in fact precipitate pattern sensitive epilepsy or even migraine. So they have actually documented most of the art forms which has actually caused, like in 1971 in Delhi, in London actually, in fact it precipitated headaches and they needed dark glasses to view the art gallery. So in 1918 an advertisement had actually evoked this kind of headaches and seizures. So in 2005, and this was actually a picture by Debbie Isle, and in fact, actually, it was her migrainous aura which has inspired her art. So this they have actually projected in that article just to show how discomforting sometimes even art can be for the common public. Now I'll come to the epilepsy symptoms. One is sunflower syndrome or the self-induced photosensitive epilepsy. So this is usually seen in children between the ages of 3 to 15 and usually in the teenagers. It usually affects girls more than boys. And these are self-induced seizures, and children usually tend to wave the hands with the fingers spread out with the light rays coming, and they have this kind of self-inducing phenomenon. And these children also have some cognitive and attention difficulties, and seizures often consist of eyelid myotonia, absences, and few may have 50% may also have spontaneous seizure. And valproate monotherapy is the ideal one, or valproate in combination with something else, either if there are absences, maybe ethosuximide. And they are specifically termed that levetiracetam is extremely weak in controlling these type of epilepsies, and it should be preferably avoided, and trigger avoidance is the basic thing. Now, what these show, maybe some school say that the sunflower syndrome is nothing but a weak type of a idiopathic photosensitive epilepsy, and the children may be getting some kind of a pleasurable sensation out of it. So that is one school of thought. Now, these are all the epilepsies where photoparoxysmal response have been associated. Majority are idiopathic, and some are actually the symptomatic ones, of which the Dravet syndrome is one of the most important ones. And then you have the progressive myoclonus epilepsy symptoms also. Now, there are two syndromes which I will definitely mention. One is the GM, the thyroid myotonia with absences. This is one of the most distinctive IgE syndromes, but unfortunately, IgE is yet to fully acknowledge the syndrome. It consists the triad of eyelid myotonia with absences. Eye-closure actually elicits the EEG changes with photosensitivity, predominantly seen in girls, and they have this retropertion, head retropertion because of the eyelid myotonia. So it starts with eyelid myotonia and then goes to the head retropertion. The best combination is valproate, clonazepam, ethosuximide. This is the best combination, and they will require lifelong treatment and never to take further medication. Now, in 2016, actually, in the classification, you can see that in the absence subtype, they have actually added this eyelid myotonia, actually as a mention of perhaps this GML subtype. And the next very important one is the idiopathic photosensitive occipital lobe epilepsy, usually seen in the manifest in the later half of first decade or early part of second decade. And usual triggers are watching television and video games. And they may have all these visual auras and autonomic symptoms which may be associated with any of the occipital epilepsies. And clinical examination, imaging are essentially normal. And this needs to be differentiated from the other generalized epilepsies, idiopathic generalized epilepsy. Now, most of the epilepsy syndromes that I'm going to tell now from now on are probably an incomplete penetrance of partial representation of this idiopathic photosensitive occipital lobe epilepsy. One type is actually television epilepsy. It just denotes that it is triggered by television and it's not specific symptom as such. Usually seen in the children of that age group, twofold more common in girls. And there is this phenomenon of compulsive attraction where the children are drawn to like a magnet towards the screen, and then they may have a seizure. Now, the newer televisions that which have a 100 hertz frequency, especially the LCD and the plasma television, of which LCD is actually better than plasma, and they have a very less chance of triggering this television-induced epilepsy. So these are all thought to be variants of the idiopathic occipital lobe epilepsy. Now, if you look at this flash rate, so if you look at the 50 hertz frequency, you have a 50% chance of precipitating a photocoagulation episode. But as it comes to 60 hertz flash rate, it reduces to 15%. So that is why this is very common in the European group, but very less in the North American, that is in US and Canada, because their televisions are having the 60 hertz flash rate. Now, the same holds true for the video game epilepsy because it is occurring at the 50 hertz, and 50 hertz is not a stimulus that we usually give enough in the victim cortex stimulation. So that may be one of the reasons why EEGs may be normal in these patients. Now, coming to all the video games I just mentioned and go. First note came in Lancet in 1981. That was the space inverter epilepsy. So that was the first note which came. Actually, this patient examination was normal and EEG was also normal. So this was a specific area of the video game which elicited the epilepsy. Then came the dark variant that in 1982, which came in the British Medical Journal. And here, the flashing frequency between 15 and 21 hertz elicited photoparoxysmal response in this one. Now, this article came in seizure, where they have tried to analyze the video game related seizure. And they have identified two types of clinical features. And they had a group of 22 patients. They divided into group 1 and group 2. And the group 1 are 10 patients exclusively while doing this video game. So that was the group 1. And that is actually middle age, 39 years was the main age. And they had non-specific EEG and imaging abnormalities. And anti-epileptic drugs are thought to be of uncertain benefit. So these are thought to be the weak variant of the idiopathic photosensitive epilepsy, which are manifesting late because of this specific stimulus. And Mahjong induced. So that was the game which they used to. That was the Taiwan game which they were playing. And that elicited this seizure. Now, the second group, they had 12 patients, still male predominant, adolescent onset, 14, 16 years. And they also had GTCS, myoclonus, and absences. And they also had spontaneous seizure. So these patients are the ones who will benefit with drug therapy, especially valproate. So probably these are the early photosensitive IPOE subspectrum, which are early manifest. Now, around 10 years later, after the first space invader epilepsy, United States reported their first case of video game epilepsy, that Nintendo epilepsy, which came in the New England Journal. And the reason they have studied is basically because the United States television frequency is basically 60 hertz. And then it was reported in Asia. They have reported as a chromatic sensitive epilepsy, a variant of photosensitive epilepsy. This was reported actually from Japan. It's also known as a Pokemon epilepsy or Pocket Monster. So that was the video game which elicited. So it happened in 1997. Actually, 685 Japanese children and some adults had convulsions at the same time throughout Japan. Actually. So all throughout while watching this very common animated television program. And immediately a research committee was put across to see what went wrong here. And they found that the red-blue shift was the most notorious. And this color combination, this shift of red desensitizing was the most important stimulating factor. And at 12 hertz, it was occurring at the 12 hertz frequency. And the candela they have noted was 120, 160, 150, and 20. So as we have earlier mentioned, what are the patterns which are most sensitive? So any frequency more than 3, red with shifting with other colors, and any candela luminance more than 20. So all were satisfied in this one. So that was the main most important. Thereafter came the criteria based on which the advertisements and video games needs to be have to obey on. So they have given this example in that when a black and white animation was given at 12 hertz, it did not elicit. Whereas it was when it was a blue-red shift was given, that elicited epileptiform discharges. So what are the recommendations? So while playing a video game, the patient should be at least sitting 4 times the diagonal screen diameter. So 4 times the diagonal screen diameter. And after 1 hour, one should have a break. So playing for more than 1 hour per session should be avoided. And sleep should be maintained. And patients who are sleep deprived should avoid playing this kind of. And patients with a family history of epilepsy or photosensitivity should preferably have an EEG examination with the photic stimulation before going for these kinds of video games. And television should be viewed at least 8 feet away. It has to be in a well-lit room with a lamp on top of the TV set. Do not approach the TV set to adjust or switch channel. Use a remote control. And if at all, if it's necessary, patients have to close one eye because binocular vision is very, very important for stimulating these kinds of seizures. Avoid discotheques and places with flashing lights. Wear polarized glasses and avoid flickering reflection from water surface, especially when going for sunbathing and all. And this is the last session, and that is regarding the reading epilepsy, because reading is thought to be visual plus a cognitive task. So though both has to be combined for you to cause a reading epilepsy. So what happens is that things are deciphered at the occipital, and it gets translated anteriorly in the frontal-romantic area, and then the seizures get manifested. So usually starts in the adolescent age group, jaw jerking or clicking sensation, and movements of the orofacial muscles, and visual stimulation with the cognitive task has to be there as precipitated during reading. And the entire mechanism is still not clear, and empirical EEG is usually normal in 80% of individuals. So only during the task, especially when given some complicated reading material, only this may be precipitated. Thank you.
Yeah, that is wonderful, Ajit. I think you've very beautifully covered the whole spectrum.
Thank you.
Except for the distractors you had, I was tempted to look at those, the one in front of me also. So let me now look at that and speak. So it is very wonderful, a full coverage. This is what is called a very comprehensive coverage. And I had already forgotten about that thing which we wrote up in Lancet. And the nursing instructor speech, how did the title come? Ajit, you remember?
Yeah, I remember.
What the editor wrote to us?
Yeah, I remember. Because the King's
There was
Speech,
an Academy-winning film that year was
King's
the King
Speech,
George
yeah.
speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they wanted the title to be something like that. We had put some other title.
Correct.
Anyway, that was a wonderful talk, very excellent as usual. We'll take up the questions later. Some are posted there, so you can just go through them.
Okay.
And now I'm very happy to invite the next, again, a very prolific speaker, Shiva Kumar. Shiva needs no introduction. I think somebody wrote a message to me. I don't want to say the name, but of all the talks so far, that particular person at least liked your chairing session, which I don't remember what it was for. Shiva, you may have to tell me, but today I had a message from somebody sitting right here. But I should tell you that. What was said, Shiva? You chaired.
GAD
Other the
antibody.
speakers, a person has written that the chairing was wonderful. So
GAD
I'm sorry that I
encephalitis.
forgot it. Okay. I remember. Okay, fine. So over to Shiva now. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. Ajit, can you unshare your slides?
Can you take up your pappus from there, Ajit? Very wonderful.
Good evening, everyone, and we will proceed for the second topic of today's discussion. Basically, this is a T20. That means it's a short and crisp update on what is happening in other epilepsy syndromes, mainly the reflex epilepsy syndromes. I'll not go into the basics of all the epilepsy syndromes because it's difficult for me to cover in next 20 minutes. So as Dr. Ajit has pointed out that epileptic seizures are usually referred to as either they are reactive to something or they are reflex to some stimuli. So reactive means either internal or external precipitating factors. Reflex means by a particular specific sensory or an afferent stimuli. So this set of syndromes was earlier called as stimulus sensitive seizures, triggered seizures, evoked seizures. Various synonyms were used for description of this until late where reflex epilepsy and epilepsy syndromes was finalized for this set of epilepsy syndromes. So we have two group of stimuli for this reflex epilepsy syndromes. One is a very basic or a simple stimuli. For example, the visual stimuli, patterns and flickering, which was shown by Dr. Ajit. And then we have complex stimuli. So in the simple stimuli, again, we have somatosensory stimuli, we have startle, we have auditory reflexes, which can cause reflex seizures. In the complex means more than one stimuli is involved in the generation of this seizure or epilepsy. So we have thinking epilepsy, music, reading, eating, and praxis. So I'll be basically touching upon the updates what we have because it's impossible for me to go into all the basics and all the details of all these epilepsy syndromes. So whenever there is a complex interaction between internal and external factors, depending on this, one may develop either a reflex seizure or a combination of reflex and spontaneous seizures. So one should be very, very careful whenever you're dealing with reflex seizure because you should be able to differentiate from the trigger and the facilitating stimulus. Facilitating means, for example, photic stimulation can facilitate IG syndrome. So that is not called as reflex epilepsy. So one should be able to differentiate between the trigger or the precipitating stimulus, which is a need for reflex epilepsy, then facilitating stimulus. So these are all the visual reflex epilepsy syndromes. The visual related one have been described in detail by Ajit. I'll be touching upon primary reading epilepsy, startle syndromes, hot water epilepsy, music related epilepsy, eating epilepsy, somatosensory or proprioceptive stimuli, thinking and praxis related seizures, and a little bit about orgasm induced seizures. So before I touch upon these syndromes, I would like to tell you that there is a concept of something called a system epilepsy, which has been put forth in literature. So what is this system epilepsy, and what is this new concept about in the pathophysiology of reflex syndromes? What this system epilepsy says is that seizures are accounted by discharges by involving a certain set of anatomic and physiological systems. Either it could be an anatomical structure or it could be a physiological structure. So whenever this set of anatomical and physiological systems become susceptible to either some stimuli, then they can cause something called as hyperactivity in the network. This is called a system epilepsy. That means a network is involved rather than a part of the brain which is involved in generation of this seizure, because it's impossible for us to tell that only occipital lobe or parietal lobe or temporal lobe is involved in the generation of reflex seizure. So this concept of system epilepsy is put forth, which can explain most of the features of reflex seizures. So whenever you have a system which is both anatomical as well as physiological, and if some trigger happens in that system, then they can have seizures which usually respond to certain stimuli. Either it could be a sensory or it could be a motor, or it could be a cognitive stimuli. So this is the concept of system epilepsy. So what does this system epilepsy say? System epilepsy says that there could be hyperexcitable networks which can be distributed in either in both the hemispheres, or it can be localized to one single hemisphere, or it could be in the part of a hemisphere. So based on this, we can see that in idiopathic generalized epilepsies, both the networks will be involved in both the hemisphere. If it is an idiopathic focal epilepsy, only one hemisphere may be involved. And in case of symptomatic generalized epilepsies, depending on the pathology, you can have either focal or a generalized form of hyperexcitable networks. So this concept can also be applied to other epilepsy syndromes like childhood absence epilepsy, photosensitive epilepsies, eyelid myoclonia with absences, IgE with seizures related to sleep-wake cycle, which we call it as epileptic K complexes, which can be seen in this group of epilepsy syndromes. And in some of the idiopathic focal epilepsies like beds and fixation of seizures can also be explained based on this concept of system epilepsy. So this is the basis of reflex seizure as well as other idiopathic and focal seizures, where you can explain most of the features, what happens in this epilepsy syndromes. So let's go to primary reading epilepsy. The primary reading epilepsy is the prototype of all the reflex epilepsy syndromes. Initially, it was described by Bickforth from the Mayo Clinic in 1956, where he had described two categories of reading epilepsy. One is called as primary, where only seizures which were related to reading were described. The second one was secondary reading epilepsy, in which not only reading, but there was other stimuli which could evoke seizures in this group of people. So according to the predominant type of seizures which were seen in this reflex epilepsy, a classification has been put forth in 1998, where they say it could be either a myoclonic type or it could be a focal type. So in the myoclonic type, it is called as myoclonic reading epilepsy. It's called as myoclonic variant of reading epilepsy. And in the focal type, it's called as focal seizures of alexia, or it could be a partial. Partial term is not used in the current classification, so we can stick on to focal seizures of alexia. So they found that in addition to these reading seizures, there were other triggers for seizures to happen in this group of people, which they noted as either writing or speaking or music. So they also use the term called as language-induced epilepsy in the earlier, that is in the early part of 20th century, which the reflex epilepsy was also called as language-induced epilepsy. So what are all the triggering factors for this reading reflex epilepsy? The commonest trigger is reading. So in addition to reading, they can have other linguistic and non-linguistic higher mental activities, like someone is arguing during a conversation. That itself can trigger a seizure. Writing, calculating, reading figures, playing piano, or sometimes board and card games. All these things in addition to reading can precipitate seizures in this group of epilepsy syndromes. And this reading epilepsy can also be associated with JME, which has been described by paper from Dr. Radhakrishnan from Sri Chitra and also from Mayer in 2006. And these people also can have photic stimulation whenever you do IPS. About 1 in 10 of the reading epilepsy patients can have photic stimulation positive EEG. So they can also occur with JMEs. So what are the EEG findings we get in this epilepsy syndrome? Most of the time, interictal EEGs are normal in about more than 80% of the case. Only in few cases, we can see either focal IDs, which are usually over the temporal region, or sometimes we can have generalized spike wave discharges, particularly after sleep or awake recording. So it's good always to get a sleep followed by an awake record, so that you can elicit some of these discharges in reading epilepsy. 1 in 10, as I told you, can exhibit photosensitivity, and you should be careful that this can also be associated with JME prototype. And during the ictal discharges are usually precipitated by reading. So what you see during these ictal discharges, they can be a single or a short volley of tiny spike and wave discharges or a spike and wave complex. Whenever they have myoclonic jerks around the mouth, it produces a lot of myogenic artifacts. So in this myogenic artifact, sometimes you will not be able to pick up these small tiny spike and wave discharges unless you carefully see the EEGs. And when you look into the distribution of the IEDs in this group of reflex epilepsies, 1/3 will have ictal discharges arising bilaterally, which are usually symmetric. And in another 1/3, you can have bilateral discharges, but usually they are asymmetric. And in the rest, about 30 to 40%, they can have strictly localized IEDs, predominantly over the language dominant hemisphere. That is the ictal and the interictal findings, what we see in case of reading epilepsies. So what is the mechanism of epileptogenesis in this reflex reading epilepsy? The pathophysiological mechanism and anatomical substrates are not fully understood in most of these reflex epilepsies. So what they have postulated is reading, as we all know, it is a very complex process, involves vision or visual analysis, semantic processing, grapheme to phonemic conversion, memory while you're reading. You can have articulation, particularly you can see someone articulating while they read certain things. And then there's something called as acoustic monitoring. That means you also hear to what you read. So based on all these multiple factors, there may be networks involved which can be either contiguous or non-contiguous. So there need not always be a contiguous networks which are adjacent to one another. So it can be non-contiguous networks also which can be involved in this process. So what is the evidence for us to say that these are the structures which are involved in reading epilepsy? So we know that there are EEG fMRI studies which have come up in most of these reflex epilepsies, which showed that during the time of seizures, this EEG fMRI can show activation of several cortical and subcortical structures, which can be seen during the time of reading, which can also be seen during the time of emotional content of reading also. Most of these abnormalities or the activation has been seen over the language dominant areas, predominantly involving the motor, premotor, mesiotemporal, limbic areas, striatum and thalami. But the most important, the basic thing is there is predominant involvement of the dominant hemisphere, that is mainly the left posterior dominant dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in addition to these language dominant areas, which was seen on the spike triggered fMRI studies. And what they also postulated is that there is an underlying hyperexcitability due to genetic predisposition, or it could be due to an acquired lesion. Based on this, whenever there is a superimposition sensory stimuli coming up in this hyperexcitable cortex, one are prone for getting seizures. So are there any genetics which is available for this reflex epilepsies, particularly reading epilepsies? Most of these reflex epilepsies have few genes which have been identified except reading induced seizures. They are postulated based on various publications that it's more likely to be an autosomal dominant with incomplete penetrance, but a specific loci or a gene is not being identified so far for reading induced seizures. I'll touch upon the genetics of other reflex seizures. When we go upon, we need not always come back to this slide again. In music induced seizures, there are few genetic abnormalities which have been identified, mainly the LG1 gene, and then the sodium channel mutations also has been described in music induced seizures. In eating epilepsy, again, MECP gene, P2 gene has been identified, mainly in clusters, which is seen in Sri Lankan population. And in hot water seizures, there are chromosomes like chromosome 10 and 4. In addition, chromosome 9 has been identified as a new loci for hot water seizures from NIMHANS in the genetic study, what they had published earlier. And the one reflex seizure, which usually does not have genetic cause, is the startle-induced seizure, which is usually related to some kind of a focal or an underlying pathology on the MRI or the brain. So this is the only epilepsy which does not have any genetic contribution in the list of reflex epilepsies. So with this, we'll move on to the next group of reflex epilepsy syndrome, which is the startle epilepsy. So startle means it's a seizure, sudden seizure, which is induced by sudden stimuli. Usually it is a surprise stimuli to the individual. It can be in a form of a sudden noise. It can be unexpected touch. It can be some somatosensory or visual stimuli, or it can be combination of any of these. So what is the important thing about this is whenever these stimuli are presented in repeated fashion, then there can be something called as habituation. So habituation happens, then one may not get this kind of seizures called as startle seizures. So usually, as I told you, that these are not genetic related reflex epilepsies. These are usually related to structural brain problems, which can be either acquired or congenital. And most common implicated causes for this epilepsy in literature is gliosis, which can be related to perinatal insult, or it may be in cases of infantile hemiplegia, encephalomalacia. It has also been described in certain metabolic disorders like aspartyl glucosamine. It's also described in a child with trisomy 21 who presented as LGS and startle epilepsy. And the most important thing, as I told you, is usually they don't have genetic basis. So what are the clinical manifestations? The clinical manifestations are startle seizures, which usually are focal seizures or partial seizures and usually last very brief, less than 30 seconds. And startle seizures is a response which is followed by a partial seizure, and the predominant seizure type which is seen in this focal epilepsy is tonic posturing. This tonic posturing can be asymmetrical, which is also called as hemitonic seizures, which can result in sudden falls and injuries. Rarely they can have atonic or myoclonic component. And in addition to this tonic or atonic or myoclonic component, they can also have autonomic manifestation during the seizures. So all these seizures can resemble like an SMA. So one should not get confused for this as a structural pathology or the SMA, because the onset is with a startle. Whenever you have a startle response and then a focal seizure, always suspect whether you're dealing with startle epilepsy. And most of these kids who have got startle syndrome, you have focal neurological deficits on clinical examination, and the MRI or the CT scan usually shows some kind of a lesion, which is usually static and it is non-progressive. And of late, we have reports saying that even startle epilepsy syndrome has been described in people who have got normal MRI also. So it's very rare. Most of them have some kind of underlying structural pathology. So what does the EEG show in this startle epilepsy? So when you do an EEG during this epilepsy, you can have something called as initial vertex discharge. Once you have the vertex discharge, then you have something called something like a diffuse flattening or low voltage, followed by a low voltage fast activity. And the frequency of this low voltage fast activity is usually at about 9 to 10 hertz. So there are studies where people have seen what happens when they have implanted depth electrodes in people who have got startle epilepsy. What they could see was they could see that there could be a high amplitude evoked response predominantly over the motor areas, which was the corresponding one which was seen on the EEG as a vertex discharge. And usually this vertex discharge is followed by an EEG discharge, which starts from the motor or the premotor cortex and spreads to either ipsilateral, mesial, frontal or parietal regions, either anteriorly or posteriorly, as well as it can have rich connections with the opposite hemisphere, and it can quickly spread to the contralateral frontal regions also, indicating that it is a network which is involved rather than a part of the brain, and it can be either unilateral or bilateral. So what does the MEG studies which have been published in MR negative startle epilepsy show? They show that there is involvement of cingulate gyrus along with the supplementary motor area, which could be the region where the genesis of startle epilepsy can happen. So either it can be cingulate or in the supplementary motor area. So the final hypothesis is the mechanisms which are responsible for startle is mainly originate from the motor, premotor cortex, and also include the supplementary motor area as well as the cingulate gyrus. So what is the prognosis of the startle epilepsy? The prognosis is usually poor. Rarely it has been described in adults. I told you that it can also be, it has been described in people who have got normal MRIs also. And most of these people who have startle epilepsies have developmental delay in children, particularly in the first decade. But the one which is described in adults, this is seen without any developmental delay. And usually they are refractory. They have a lot of comorbidities because of multiple falls and injuries, and they have a poor quality of life. And usually they are medically refractory. Certain reports say that some respond very well to lamotrigine. So lamotrigine can be tried in addition to levetiracetam and clobazam in people who have got startle-induced reflex seizures. Very rarely people are also benefited from lesionectomy, callosotomy, and subpile transection also, who are medically refractory to anticonvulsant drugs. So then we'll move on to the next topic. It's hot water epilepsy, and also called as bathing epilepsy. It was initially described in New Zealand in 1945, that is about 75 years ago. And there were initially few sporadic reports described in various countries. And later on it was found and published from India that this is one of the commonest reflex epilepsy which is seen in a geographic location, that is particularly in southern India, mainly the Karnataka, in and around Bangalore and other regions where they have described this. The basis of this hot water epilepsy is they have an underlying genetic trait, and they have something called as cultural habits called as local bathing habits, which is the reason for this kind of hot water epilepsy to be described in the small group of population in southern India. The seizures in this hot water epilepsy are usually focal. Either it can be focal aware or focal unaware motor seizures. The triggers are very obvious. The caretakers of these children who come and tell you say that after a bath with the hot water, they see that these seizures are triggered. So the trigger is very, very obvious in this group of people. Some children also describe that they get some pleasurable feeling along with nausea, vomiting, and hallucination. And the frequency of these seizures depends on cultural practice of hot baths. It can be somewhere from 1 to 3, depending on how many times they take bath in a month. So in olden days, the bath used to be taken either weekly or once in fortnight or something like that. So it depends on the frequency of how many times they take the hot baths. And in addition to this, they can have few spontaneous seizures also in addition to hot water epilepsy. So there are various papers which have been published or published literature on hot water epilepsy. The highest number of cases was reported from India, initially by Dr. Mani from NIMHANS, about 108 cases were reported, and later on by Gurraj and Satish Chandra group, about 78 cases, and later on by Satish Chandra, about 279 cases. So what you can find is, it is the most common reflex epilepsy, which is seen predominantly in males, and the age group is usually in early infancy and childhood. Most of them are in few months or years. Very rarely it is described after the first decade. Most of them had complex partial seizures. Very few had generalized tonic-clonic seizures, and a few had simple partial seizures and atonic seizures. And you can see there's the temperature of water. In most of these reports, the temperature of water was more than 40, up to 50 degrees centigrade. That is the one of the triggering factor which might be the reason for inducing seizures in hot water epilepsy. And in addition to this hot water reflex seizures, they can have non-reflex epilepsy in about ranging from about 12% to 100%. So they can have reflex as well as spontaneous seizures in this group. And in Indian study, it was reported from 12% to 25%. So in NIMHANS, Dr. Satish Chandra group had also done something called a SPECT in 10 patients of pure hot water epilepsy. So what they did is they selected 10 patients who had recurrent pure hot water epilepsy, and then they tried to do an ictal SPECT in all these 10 people of hot water epilepsy. What they found was there was hypermetabolic uptake in the medial temporal structures and the hypothalamus. We know that limbic structures and hypothalamus is the one which is involved in the thermoregulation in the body. So in this 10, 3 had abnormalities on the left, 2 had abnormalities on the right. And these right 2 patients, there was rapid spread to the opposite hemisphere. In others, the lateralization was not very, very clear. So coming to the genetics about hot water epilepsy, initially 2 chromosomes, that is chromosome 10 and chromosome 4, was described as a loci for hot water epilepsy across the world. In spite of this, there was no clear picture about the pathophysiological mechanism of hot water epilepsy. What they postulated was it could be related to something called as complex, tactile and temperature dependent stimuli, which could induce seizures, or they may have aberrant or genetically determined abnormal thermoregulatory system, which is sensitive to rapid rise in temperature. So these are the 2 things which we postulated probably the reason for hot water epilepsy. Some of these kids had an intense pleasurable sensation whenever they had this bathing induced seizures, and they used to continue to bathe until they get a seizure. This was similar to something what they had found in adult rats, which were repeatedly exposed to hot water. And these rats were genetically modified so that they are predisposed to epilepsy. So this concept was called as hyperthermic kindling, which could also be applied to these kids who continue to bathe with an intense pleasure sensation until they get a seizure. So recently a paper was published from NIMHANS, Dr. Sanjeev Sinha and Dr. Satish Chandra, where they described another chromosome, chromosome 9, in a group of families where they had hot water epilepsy. But so now we have chromosome 4, we have chromosome 9 and chromosome 10. In spite of these 3 chromosomes, the exact pathophysiology, the reason for this kind of hot water epilepsy is not implicated. The number of chromosomes increasing and a specific chromosome 9 found in Indian population indicates that hot water could be a genetic heterogeneous disease, and further studies are required to find out what exactly is the reason for this kind of reflex seizure, particularly hot water epilepsy. Then we'll quickly move on to something called as music epilepsy. So we all know there are papers published from South Korea and earlier that listening to music is a protective phenomena or reduces the IEDs in the EEG as well as reduces the seizures in EEG. But the other side of the coin is that there is something called as music-induced seizures, which is a very rare reflex epilepsy, which can happen in about 1 in 10 lakh subjects. It was initially described by Critchley, and they found that it is more common in females, and the mean age group of presentation in this music epilepsy is around 28 years. In this, there are 2 groups. One that is a smaller group where only pure music related epilepsy is seen. The other group is where both spontaneous and seizure induced by music are seen. The predominant group is a combination of spontaneous and reflex music induced seizures. Usually in this second group, music-induced seizures usually begin 1 year after the onset of spontaneous attack. So immediately the music-induced seizures are not seen. Usually it is seen after a year after the spontaneous seizures. So what does the EEG show in this group of people who have got music epilepsy? Predominantly interictal IDs are seen over the temporal regions, more over the right side. And in the ictal EEGs, usually the temporal abnormalities are seen like a simple or a complex partial seizures. Usually these are triggered by music, either during sleep or thinking about music also can trigger this kind of an ictal EEG abnormalities. Immediately after listening to music for a few seconds or minutes, it is not elicited. It requires a latent period, that is called as latency is there before a seizure could happen once someone listens to your music. And sometimes the stimulus can be stereotyped. For example, it could be a single musical track which you play, they can have seizures. Sometimes it can be related to sounds of machinery also. And this is the thing about music epilepsy. And I told you that there are mutations like LG1 and sodium channel mutation, which has been described in music-induced epilepsy. If someone has got LG1 mutation, this kind of music-induced seizures and spontaneous seizures can be provoked by speech or even answering on the phone. So someone who's got LG1 mutation, they can have this kind of speech-induced seizures or music-induced seizures also. Mechanism is not fully understood. What PET studies have shown is mainly the right hemisphere is involved. We all know that musical representation is always in the right hemisphere in and around the auditory cortex. So usually the right hemisphere dominant was seen in this PET studies, and in some of these there was bilateral representation. They could also see that there was an emotional content to the stimulus, which was also seen as a PET activation in this study, indicating that during music, emotional components can also be involved, indicating it's a complex reflex epilepsy syndromes. EEG fMRI studies, what it has shown? It has shown that there is an increase in the blood flow during the EEG fMRI studies in nucleus accumbens, orbitofrontal, cingulate cortex, and part of right insula and occipital regions, indicating that the network is not localized. It is a diffuse network, predominantly seen on the right hemisphere, but it can also be seen on both hemispheres. Someone who is listening to a complex music with emotional content, whole of the right hemisphere is activated. But if someone is listening to a very simple neutral music, only the acoustic representative areas on the right hemisphere are involved, indicating that it can be simple and it can be complex reflex seizures. So next we'll quickly move on to something called as eating epilepsy, which is again very rare, 0.005 to 0.01 epilepsies with high prevalence in Sri Lanka. So how do you define a eating epilepsy? When you have more than 50% of seizures happening within 30 minutes of eating, these people are classified or defined as suffering from eating epilepsies. Seizures can happen either before a meal, during a meal, or in the postprandial state also. So what are the common triggers? The triggers can vary from patient to patient, but usually they are stereotyped in a given patient, and they can have emotional as well as autonomic symptoms also associated with this eating epilepsy reflex syndromes. And the other important thing is it also depends on the stimulation from the mouth or pharynx. That means when you put the food in mouth, that itself can be a reason for them to have a reflex seizure. It's again seen predominantly in males in the second decade. High incidence has been noted in siblings who have eating epilepsy, again indicating that clusters can be seen in familial eating epilepsy groups. And usually they are refractory to treatment and the response to medications is very, very poor. So how do the seizures occur? Seizures usually occur within 30 minutes of eating. Either it can be before, during, or after the seizure. Usually they are focal seizures. Either it can be focal aware or focal unaware seizure. Usually they have a single episode during a seizure, but in some they can have periodic spasms during eating. Some also can have report spontaneous seizures. And in some, the trigger can be by smell of food, thought of food, and even after heavy meal. Particularly if someone has got a carbohydrate meal, they can have this as a trigger in eating epilepsy. So there are various papers which have been published from India also. One was from Sujit, which was published in 2016, where they had studied 47 patients of eating seizures and eating epilepsy syndromes. What was the difference they found when compared to other studies which was published in the literature was the ictal onset was predominantly in the anterior cortex in other studies which was published in the literature, whereas this study which was published from Chitra showed that the predominant ictal onset was from the posterior cortex. That was the difference what was seen. Otherwise, there was no other significant parameters noted in this group. Second thing is when they tried to compare between MR negative and MR positive patients who are having eating epilepsy and eating seizure, what they found was clustering was more common in MR positive cases. And the second thing was MR positive cases had more of anterior cortical representation in the EEG, and whereas MR negative had predominant posterior cortical representation, and in the remaining, it was more of multifocal or a diffuse process, indicating that this group was slightly different from the other publications where posterior cortex was predominantly involved in this group of eating epilepsy groups. This was the significant difference noted in this paper. So there were also EEG fMRI studies which has been published from various authors. What they found was whenever there is a lesion in the frontal lobe and they presented with eating seizures, the predominant areas which were activated during EEG fMRI was frontotemporoparietal regions and including occipital and lingual gyroid. What we learn from this is we can know that it is a network which is activated. It is not a part of the brain, even though the lesion was present in the frontal lobe. It's not the lobar or the single part of the brain. It is a network which gets activated, again supporting the concept of something called a system epilepsy. And even fMRI studies have shown that there could be activation in the limbic system, insula, and its connection with the gustatory cortex, indicating that the processing of food, including the thought, the smell, all these things can happen in these structures, and these may be implicated in causation of eating epilepsy. So next we'll move on to something called as somatosensory or proprioceptive induced seizures. When someone comes to you with history of somatosensory seizures, which is new onset, always rule out whether if they are suffering from non-ketotic hyperglycemia. If not, this can be induced by various somatosensory stimulations like skin friction, which is called as rubbing epilepsy, touching or tapping, or even toothbrush epilepsy is a kind of a somatosensory seizure. It could be related to stimulation of the external ear, which is also called as auricular epilepsy. Most of these syndromes are limited to a specific cutaneous trigger, which is usually located around the head and the back region. And there have been reports of lesions involving the parietal and the sensory motor cortex, along with supplementary motor areas, and a few case reports of even involvement of the temporal lobe, again indicating that it is not a part of the brain. It is the network or the more than a part of the brain which is involved in generation of this somatosensory seizures. That is about somatosensory. Then we quickly move on to thinking and praxis related reflex seizures. We know that praxis is nothing but a process of transcoding thinking into an action. It could be a voluntary or an intentional act. So there are two components here. One is a thinking component called as spatial thinking. The other one is called as an action component called as eventual action. So in this group of epilepsies, they can have seizures either because of thinking or because of an action. So it could be seizures happening in two ends of the spectrum. Most of this praxis and spatial thinking reflex seizures are associated with IG syndromes, mainly juvenile myoclonic epilepsies. Even up to 1/3 to 1/2 of people with JME can have praxis sensitivity. That is what is described in literature. So what are the usual triggers? Triggers can be in a form of a mental calculation, which was earlier called as epilepsia arithmetis, which was initially described in 1962. It can be related to board games. It can be related to thinking. It can be also related to something called pressure to decide. Whenever you're playing a game, there is a pressure that you should have to move or you have to decide within a stipulated period of time. So that itself can be a reason for praxis-induced epilepsy called as decision-making epilepsy. And there are other games which Dr. Ajita told, Mahjong, which is in the eastern part of Asia. There's another exotic game called Punchi, predominantly in Sri Lanka. All these games where there is involvement of hand in playing these games, they can have this kind of praxis-induced seizures. And most of the seizures in praxis-induced epilepsies are myoclonic. So we all know that praxis-induced seizures are almost always described with IG syndromes, particularly JME. But there are certain reports which have been reported in literature in isolated case reports where they have found that focal praxis-induced reflex seizures can also be due to lesions in the parietal lobe. In this case report, which was published in 2016, they could find that parietal focal cortical dysplasia was one of the reasons for focal praxis-induced reflex seizure. So it can be rarely focal also in addition to idiopathic generalized epilepsies. So what is the network which is involved here? It is predominantly the parietal, that is intraparietal, superior parietal, and inferior parietal lobule, along with frontal networks, that is middle frontal gyrus, premotor cortex, and inferior frontal gyrus. We all know that in right-handed individual, the lateralization is always to the left, but whereas in left-handed individuals, it is predominantly the left hemisphere which is involved, with little bit involvement of the right hemisphere also. Again, it is the network concept which is involved in this reflex epilepsy and not a part of the brain which is involved. So the last part, before I end my talk, that is before the climax, we'll a little bit see about orgasm-induced seizures. See, these orgasm-induced seizures are rare seizures which are precipitated during or after the climax. They can have a latent period of few minutes to few hours, predominantly seen in females, and it can be both spontaneous and reflex partial seizures. And the implication is the right hemisphere here. We know that sexual function is being implicated in the right hemisphere, with little bit of role from the hormones. Maybe hormonal imbalance, hormonal concept also has been implicated in the cause of this orgasm-induced seizures. And the networks which has been postulated again are postcentral gyrus, parietal lobe with paracentral region, frontal and mediobasal temporal lobes, indicating again it is a network, not a single part of the brain which is implicated in reflex seizures. So with this, I'll end my talk with a few take-home points. Reflex seizures induced by different stimuli should be questioned during the evaluation, and necessary stimulations during the EEG has to be performed to confirm the diagnosis of reflex seizures. Stimulatory input and areas of hyperexcitability may be different for different seizure types, and it also depends on the age of maturation of the brain, also on the age of the individual. But the ultimate mechanisms are the same in all these group of reflex epilepsy syndromes, indicating or implying that activation of critical neuronal mass supported by the cortical and subcortical structures, including thalamus, is the one which is responsible for producing stereotyped symptomatologies. Future studies and increasing usage of advanced neuroimaging techniques will help us to understand the complex network mechanism underlying this group of reflex epilepsy syndromes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiva. As expected, very, very elaborate and comprehensive. I think you touch upon everything like what Ajit did. So very proud to have two talks back to back. So we'll take the questions later. I'm not saying more about both the talks now because of the interest of time. And I can see Kalyani waiting to conclude. Yeah, it's starting with uninhibitory laughter as expected. So over to Kalyani. She also needs no introduction. She is the cutie beauty of our group, and without her laughter, nothing is complete. All her friends are here. I can see Paresh, everybody. Yeah. So yeah, over to Kalyani.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Happy Independence Day to all. And after the two luminous talks, forgive me if I'm not up to the mark. So, and forgive me for the slides because everything is orange and green. So if there is some problem with the font colors, I'm sorry. So I will run through it because already we have exceeded the time. So far we have realized that reflex seizures are due to a specific stimulus and have been called as triggered seizures or evoked seizures. And the previous speakers have highlighted that what is the basic difference when we see the seizures in the form of alcohol withdrawal or hyperglycemia or renal or hepatic encephalopathy or sleep deprivation. So they are called as facilitating factors. That means the factors which overall reduce the threshold of neuronal excitability as opposed to reflex seizures. So what is unique about reflex seizures is there is a particular trigger which acts through a particular network, as we said, as an anatomical physiological system, and gives rise to a particular semiology. And that's why reflex seizures are different than the reactive seizures, which are due to the facilitating factors. And if we would see them, we can classify them into simple, complex, extrinsic, intrinsic. We'll come to this later. So the stimuli can be actually classified to make it more lucid. Why are we studying reflex seizures? The most important thing is if the patient is able to identify, or we are able to identify the trigger, there is a chance that part of the seizures can be avoided just by reducing or avoiding the trigger. They constitute around 6.5% of the total seizures, and the commonest being the eating seizures. Apart from that, we know that there is genetic tendency and defined loci for most of the reflex seizures. The few facts I think would be highlighted, which is important, is they are stimulus specific, but not epilepsy phenotype. That means a single stimulus can result in either a myoclonus or a generalized seizure, depending upon from where the initiating cortex is propagating the rhythm to. Also, these seizures may not have age or sex specificity, but there are certain seizures like photosensitive and orgasm-induced seizures, which are more in female, whereas reading, eating, and hot water epilepsy is more commonly male. Previously, many people have tried to classify it depending upon the stimuli which are responsible for the seizures. That means, is the stimulus peripheral? Peripheral is through the sensory organs, like either touch or visual or reading, whereas central is where the higher cognitive functions are involved to generate the seizures. Similarly, the stimuli can be divided into sensory or cognitive, or the seizures can be divided into the semiology, the way they present. As previously, both the speakers have wonderfully gone into the detail of these. So these are basically the types of reflex seizures we see. And some of the rare ones are like toothbrush, telephone, orgasm, and Pinocchio, I think seizures related to lying, which is amazing. So I think reflex seizures can be studied in the way the stimulus characteristics. Like if I see a stimulus which is excitatory or inhibitory, what is the duration of the stimulus? So sometimes it has been found that if a stimulus is short-lived, the patient may not have seizure, but the same stimulus continues for a longer duration. For example, in case of a reading, it has been found that sometimes the duration of the stimulus matters. It also matters in latency. That means there are certain fast-acting stimuli and there are certain slow-acting stimuli. Fast-acting are like photic stimulation. You give the stimulation, you get the seizures in suspected patients. Whereas slow-acting would be those cognitive processes. Like sometimes the stimulus and the actual occurrence of seizure may be separated by a substantial time gap. And that's why it is very difficult to relate that seizure to the particular stimulus. The stimulus can be single, like in a case of a startle, like sudden sound or a touch, and that one stimulus is enough to give rise to seizures, or it can be repetitive, like in case of photic stimulation, where not a single flash, but a repetitive frequency or particular frequency only can stimulate the seizure. Another important characteristic is self-induction, because people have found that they get pleasant sensations when the stimulus would come. And ideally, it has been told that a stimulus should be considered as provocative if there is 50% increase in the epileptiform discharge. I'm going to run through all the epilepsies because I'm sure we have gone extensively through it. So in the somatosensory stimuli, the rubbing type I found very interesting because here the self-induction is seen very common, that the children, they touch a part of a shoulder or vertex and they are found to have the seizures. Toothbrushing epilepsy is also very interesting because they have tried to see whether if someone else's brushes your tooth or if I use electrical toothbrush, in all those circumstances, the patient has got seizures. Visual epilepsy was extensively dealt. The way I see the triggers are like whether there are hardware specific, like the scan frequency of a TV set, as has been told that at 50 hertz and at 60 hertz, basically the rate of flickering would decide how the cortex is getting stimulated. So at 100 hertz TV, what is happening is the rasters of the lines, which are paired as odd and even fields, they cannot be differentiated by the human visual cortex, and thus the flickering is not seen, and that's why they won't get seizures. But there can be software specific triggers. That means wavelength dependent, like a particular color can stimulate a seizure, or quantity of light dependent. That means the contrast of the stimulus would decide whether the patient would have seizures. We have also seen pattern seizures. So there are characteristics. What they say that if a particular pattern is extending 20 minutes of an angle to the eye, then that is probably more epileptogenic than other patterns. And that's why we have seen like the checkerboard pattern is probably more epileptogenic than others. It is also important that if the patterns are like stationary or they are moving, they are vibratory motion, or if they are moving towards each other, So there are many other characteristics which would stimulate a visual cortex. The most important thing is requirement of a binocular vision, which has been emphasized by Dr. Ajit before. That means there have been patterns where only half of the visual field is stimulated, but they are found to be less epileptogenic as compared to those where both visual fields are stimulated. So it also depends upon the frequency of the stimuli. In visual specifically, if we go to photic, we know that the specific wavelength and what is called as altered visual contrast gain control. That means the contrast difference between the stimuli is going to decide whether the patient would have seizures or not. We all know that there are magno and parvocellular pathways which are conducting this, and magnocellular pathways are the one which are susceptible to higher temporal frequency. Higher temporal frequency means very fast stimuli, whereas the parvocellular ones are the ones which are responsible for lower temporal and higher spatial frequency. So as we know that generally the photic stimulation initiates epilepsy, most of our genetic generalized epilepsy, but they are also seen sometimes in TLE as well as in Dravet syndrome. These are the patterns which I had seen in one of the articles, that they have tried to use checker pattern. They have tried to use only the gratings. They have tried to change the gratings as alternate black and white. They have tried to stimulate half of the visual field. They also tried it into a radial pattern. They also tried whether the pattern can be moving. And each one of them have a different level of epileptogenicity. It has also been demonstrated by using TMS, that people have tried to see that what is the excitability of the visual cortex in these patients at rest. And they have found that when we find a cortical motor threshold in transcranial magnetic stimulation, they can also find something called as phosphine threshold. So these patients' visual cortices are basically hyperexcitable. The preventive measures have been already highlighted by Dr. Ajit, so I would not go into this. The other one which I liked was from old times, like one of the Chinese poet, they have mentioned that just listening to the street vendor's flute, he would become absent-minded, which is what we know as a musicogenic epilepsy. And what is interesting in musicogenic epilepsy is that sometimes it may be so specific to the type of music, like whether it is a jazz or a hip hop or a death metal, versus a composer like Mozart versus someone else, or versus an instrument like a piano, or can cause more seizures. So, and the emotional content. So neutral music versus emotionally charged music can have different epileptogenicity. And it has been found to be seen in a child as young as 6 months old. This epilepsy may have a more latency, and that's why it is difficult to prove sometimes. They say dopamine has a role in causing musicogenic epilepsy. And interesting is, as music is a trigger, it can also be a part of a ictal phenomena where people can have ictal singing, humming, and whistling. It was found that temporal lobe epilepsy also can have musicogenic features. So, but there are subtle differences in both. Like when the musicogenic epilepsy is found, it is more common in people who are basically musically able. That means people who are trained into music or who have an ear of understanding the pitch and the tone. They would have only music related, high emotional content, melody related epilepsy. Whereas in TAD, they would not have any different musical perception than a normal population. And they would not remember the stimulus of the music perfectly. They would remember as if we are remembering an old film that, yeah, some music was played and I felt this. Whereas in case of musicogenic epilepsy, they can exactly tell you in which circumstances and what tune made the seizure happen. And that they can tell because here it's a part of an aura. Whereas in temporal lobe epilepsy, it can become a part of the ictus, and that's why the differentiation is difficult. Lateralization has been found to be, I'm not sure about this thing because so far we know that, and Dr. Shivkumar also said that mainly it is the right hemisphere which is meant for musicogenic epilepsy, but one of the articles mentioned that if it is a temporal lobe epilepsy with music as a trigger, then probably it is left with. I don't know the logic behind this. Coming to eating epilepsy, I don't think so that I need to tell more about it. It has been extensively told. Only thing is what we have to remember that it can be due to the actual process of eating or just thinking of it or a flavor or even a specific food. Like people have rice eating epilepsy as well. And there is mutations which are associated with eating epilepsy. praxis-induced reading epilepsy, the only one point which I would like to mention about reading is sometimes it can be language specific, and which makes it very clear that a very specific network is involved. Like a same person while reading another language may not get the seizures. In startle epilepsy, they say that though there is involvement of a diffuse brain network and probably a diffuse brain damage can happen, or a focal lesion causing a generalized presentation, cingulate and supplementary motor areas which are implicated. And I found that one paper where they have mentioned that even a gene is implicated in the startle epilepsy. This is a comprehensive table of it, and it is difficult to go through it. So basically what they have done, they have tried to show the reflex seizures, the type of seizures, what is the genetic background, treatment and prognosis. Most of them have a good to variable prognosis except for startle, which is supposed to have a not so good prognosis because of the underlying etiology. I want to highlight about reflex seizures because most of it is covered by the speakers. The whole concept is there is already a physiological system which is existing to take a particular stimulus which is either external or internal. So that particular network is doing a physiological function. Now that network gets converted into an epileptogenic network and gives rise to a seizure. And that's why what happens is the trigger and the clinical semiology may be strikingly similar. That means you are listening to the music. So the music is going through the usual auditory cortex and you have several processing about it. But your semiology also may be related to music, like either you are listening to music or you are humming or you are whistling. So it has been said that probably the physiological network which generally processes the input is the same network which gets converted into a epileptogenic network. And there is something called as learning and progression of this network. That means people who initially have reflex seizures start having later spontaneous seizures. That is because it is as if the network has been created by the trigger and now the network starts working on its own autonomically. And that's why you no more need a trigger or a stimulus, but you can have spontaneous seizures. One of the slides by Dr. Shivkumar had said that in musicogenic epilepsy, actually the musicogenic seizures start after a year or so of a spontaneous seizures. So that is something odd to this concept, like currently what I'm talking, but it is possible that sometimes because of the latency of the stimulus, to diagnose someone as a musicogenic seizure would take time, like a patient of seizure coming to you and then identifying a trigger in them is probably why the order is reversed there. So what is important is probably in the neuronal networks, there is a causal hierarchy. That means there are different nodes in the network. One of them acts as a trigger and starts triggering the whole network. And what is the causal hierarchy? That means which of these are the causative for epileptogenicity can be demonstrated by fMRI as well as connectivity analysis. And that's why people have argued actually that probably reflex seizure, saying something as reflex and spontaneous seizure is an artificial classification. Probably spontaneous seizures have their own internal stimuli which are acting as a triggers. And that's what the concept of system epilepsy too, that as we have come from a focus to a network hypothesis, probably the reflex seizures are the best example of that, where a complex network requiring in the processing of the information is giving rise to seizures. And probably reflex and spontaneous are a part of a spectrum where reflex seizure is at one end where you need a stimulus to get a seizure. Spontaneous is at other end where you don't need a stimulus. Somewhere in between the patients are on the continuum. I thought that much I could summarize. What I need to emphasize is the importance of reflex seizure is to understand that if we identify a trigger, there is a possibility to avoid some of the seizures. Thank you.
Yeah, the slides are as beautiful as Kalyani. What should I say? You made it a very completely a holistic approach to like a take-home message. Like how I think a Nobel laureate will end like this, consolidate everything and then put it as a food for thought for people. So very good. So people have not posted anything because I think all the three speakers were very superb and they have covered everything. So just to keep the ball rolling, I have put two questions each for all of you. One is, don't worry. It's like take it on a lighter note. Uh, Kalyani, the whole screen is full of your face smiling. It's okay. Now Sujit has a question. What is a cat video? That is only question he has. That is for Ajit. Where is Ajit here?
Yeah, I'm here.
What is the cat doing? Which cat? I don't know. They were full of cats actually.
No, the
From
first one.
slide
First
one.
one.
First, oh, Kalyani is the first one. For me, it's the last
on the
one.
bed and the cat jumps.
I think Sujit has jumped out. Sujit is here. Which cat do you want?
The
First one,
first one,
last
the
one?
first one, the
First one.
jumping.
Yeah, yeah.
There are some reflexes that he was talking, and same
Correct.
time. he could-
Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay.
That cat
Yes,
was,
Ajit.
that was a GIF, very appropriate GIF for that reflex actually.
Yes.
Okay, that's all you want to comment about that cat. Huh?
So what was the question? Was there a serious question in that?
What was the cat? Yeah, he had put it
Whether
very
the-
seriously. What is the cat video about?
Whether he had a reflex epilepsy or it was what type of epilepsy he had.
Oh, it was just a GIF. I thought it was appropriate for the content, so I just took it. I really don't know. Maybe something stimulated the cat. I really don't know.
Ajit, you invited trouble. And Sujit, you look very smart. Where is this man?
Hmm?
You are in front of some wonderful photograph behind you. It's a Udaipur or someplace. Anyway, Ajit, about this Jeevan syndrome, do you think we are overdiagnosing it? That is question number one. You said it is easily treatable. So, do you think that they would want to take the medicine the whole life? I mean, what is the outcome? I meant, are we slightly overestimating the syndrome? Do you feel so? Because if you take the total incidence prevalence, it is not very high. But from the
Correct.
paper which we have brought out, as well as the way the Indians are taking Jeevan syndrome, do you think that we are probably overestimating? And if so, what are the factors by which we are probably trying to say that it is Jeevan syndrome and nothing else? We have fancy for these syndromes. All of us do have that. And to make rare diagnosis also. At least 90% of us have it until probably we retire. It's not a very good approach, but about Jeevan syndrome, we have to make it very clear. But at least in Chitra, I find that Jeevan syndrome is a common diagnosis.
Okay.
It's not about you. I'm telling about everyone. There are 13 consultants jam-packed in a department. I'm telling about each and everyone. Yes, Ajit.
Even should have absence with eyelid myotonia. So that has to be the package.
Exactly.
And the imaging has to be negative. So it's basically eye closure sensitivity. That's the most important. So Fortec should introduce eye closure sensitivity. So that is the third aspect. And eyelid myotonia should have a retropulsive kind of, like the head jerks behind. So retropulsive kind of. So these are the hallmark stuff. And they are cognitively slightly on the lower end. It is actually thought to be a difficult epilepsy syndrome to treat because the response may not be as robust as in other case. And currently, the consensus is that valproate, ethosuximide with clonazepam is the triple drug which has the best outcome. Valproate, ethosuximide with clonazepam. And usually, one may not be in a position to taper or reduce AIDs as in other IgE spectrum disorders because the refractoriness is extremely high or relapses are also extremely high. So that is what I know about Jeevan.
Okay. So Ajit, the question I have in mind is there is a phenotype of IgE in which they can have eyelid myoclonia. Am I right? There is a phenotype in which there can be eyelid flutter along with a classical IgE syndrome. Okay, and they can have absences also, and they also manifest during the same period actually. And when you take an EEG, they can show a PPR. If you take only a scalp EEG, they can have the PPR, and the other things are the same. The IgE like EEG will be there. So that is often misdiagnosed as Jeevan syndrome, at least in our institute. That is what I felt because 2 or 3, you also would have seen the same thing happening. No? So how can we try to justify ourselves? You think that video EEG can settle the issue?
Okay. So this has been actually put forward in the Panetopoulos article itself. He has said that idiopathic photosensitive occipital lobe epilepsy. He has said that where should I draw the margin, where Gestalt ends and IPOE starts, or is it one end of the same spectrum of disorders like what we are having? So most of these, like if you look at this television epilepsy or the Pokemon epilepsy, they are nothing but IPOEs which are actually manifesting due to the specific stimulatory entity during that age. So that is why we had the two subtypes in the Taiwan study, blue one, which are only precipitated by that. So here, as Madam said, many a time we may tend to overdiagnose a G1 based on the fact that okay, this fellow may have had eyelid myoclonia like phenomenology. But then is the absence very clear cut in that? So that may not be there. So the absence is also a very equally important. Not only the photoparoxysmal response to eyelid closure. Many a time what I have found is that the overdiagnosed GMN may not be having that robust absence episodes as what is described in the literature. So that is what I have thought. So because the PPR is common in the both the groups basically.
At least 2 or 3 patients have seen this happening. Anyway, that's one thing. And we'll take 2 questions together. One is that none of you touched upon the latest in the series, that is the eucalyptus-induced one, which is the favorite of Thomas. I mean, you know him. And Joy Marsh has put the milk-induced, the milk products-induced seizure, which he has been putting up a lot of stuff in the scan group. So, who wants to take both of them together, or you want to split and then? Shiva, what do you say about the first question? That is the eucalyptus-induced one, and myself and few people were with Thomas all the while going abroad or someplace, and all he was always talking about this. I had actually invited him, but he had not come. So he says that we always have to ask this in history, and I am also psyched by that. I keep asking this to every other patient. So I haven't ever come across that. So is it something which is a domain specific thing, which is geographically, as somebody was saying about hot water epilepsy? To add on to hot water epilepsy, there is something called immersion epilepsy. Simple plain water can also induce epilepsy. So that is also there. There is nothing like hot water. There is something called just plain water induced epilepsy. It is called immersion epilepsy. That's a different story. So what is your take on that, Shiva?
Yeah, I'm also part of the study which was published from
Oh my God,
Thomas.
very good.
So
In the
we
Epilepsy
have,
Open, which came up recently because it sent me that article. That's the same one?
so the initial first article and the subsequent article, both the articles, we have cases
Yeah.
from our institute also. So it's
Fine.
very, very clear that we have a few patients who had exclusive seizures only after intake of eucalyptus during the first episode itself. And then we have people where seizures have become uncontrolled, or they have breakthrough seizures whenever they take these eucalyptus related products. So we have observed this in a lot of patients in Bangalore at least. And even we have got feedback from other consultants across India saying that they had a few patients where they have specifically asked for this, and they have found out that they have probably a triggered seizures because of eucalyptus. And I've
It's
seen in
true,
my
Shiva. I'm not saying that it is not there, but I don't know whether Ajit has come across. Due to some reason, I'm asking the same question to most of the people at least, when there are no evident triggers. But Joy has put a very good comment that he has identified several cases of eucalyptus precipitated seizures. That is possible, but
no,
I don't
initially
know.
we also did not believe this concept, but when we started asking frequently, for example, someone has got normal MRI, they have not missed the medication, they have one breakthrough seizure, we have not found specific triggers in them. Then on questioning, they say that I've changed my toothpaste into an Ayurvedic thing, I have changed this. We have seen doctors itself inhaling this Vicks inhaler, and they have come with seizures. And so all these things have made us to put this question as an additional question whenever we are asking for seizures, particularly when there is new onset seizure, when you don't find any cause. Second one is when the seizures are uncontrolled with all the parameters being good. For example, no drug default, no sleep issues, scan is normal, EEG normal. In those situations, I have seen that one of the parameter, particularly in Indian community where we have seen they have this this habit of always using Vicks every day in the night. all those things. We had seen a very, very VIP mother when she applied this Amrutanjan to baby who was having fever and cold. She had seizure when she slept next to the baby. And she has gone to all the best neurologists in India to find out what is the cause of seizure. And when we inquired, this was the reason, found that she used to apply Amrutanjan to the child because child had reactive airway disease, asthma. So every day she used to apply this. And she had only one seizure, no cause was found. We stopped that. Last 1.5 to 2 years, she has never come back. She has stopped all the medications. It is like gas seizures, gas-induced seizures. Similarly, we have eucalyptus-induced seizures or triggered seizures. So if you find this, we can help these people by saying that avoiding this trigger, we can at least, like treating a reflex seizure, we can avoid this seizure in them also. That's the important thing. I think everyone should ask if you don't find reason for breakthrough seizures or you're not found the cause for seizure in them.
Yeah, at least I'm asking each and every patient, and I think we are probably missing out few cases. Most of them have seen that camphor and balm and so many. Pramod has written, Joy has written. So what about milk and milk product induced epilepsy?
I think this is classically described in pediatric group where if someone is allergic to milk product, they can have seizures, but I have not heard in adults. There must be some mechanism, or maybe the food what they have taken may contain some ingredient which may trigger seizures. I think we should follow up. We should also inquire and see if there is something like this. As we found out eucalyptus related seizure, milk also could be one of the trigger. And I think we should also keep in mind whenever we are seeing any kid after intake of milk or anyone who comes with new onset seizures after starting milk, which was stopped for many years. I think we should also keep this in mind. I think we should not neglect all these points because avoiding the trigger could be a treatment for them rather than giving multiple medications.
Yeah, Dr. Joy had in turn put a very good video in Scan, and I think it was a 2006 article which I had uploaded there. That's the only reference which I could get, in which they have not explained the mechanism, but of course, milk products, that is the casein content of milk, can induce both gastrointestinal as well as brain-related problems. So it is possible. Again, we'll have to go for an fMRI or something like that to prove the best. And Kalyani, you said hearing music, for example, we keep on hearing music, and after a certain point of time, a kindling sort of mechanism happens. So are you wanting to say that too much of anything is going to be dangerous? That is what we wanted to make that point, because you said that first a physiological mechanism comes, then the physiological mechanism gets reactivated and activated, and then nodes comes, then the network comes. So suppose I'm very tuned to hearing music from my childhood, and suddenly I develop seizures at 20. Can you call it a musicogenic seizure? That's what you meant? It sounds very interesting, but the way you put it, I was a little alarmed.
Yeah.
Because most of us are hooked onto music, and I think the videos and all the stuff, no? So
Yeah.
that is
No,
what you meant. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, no, I didn't mean like continuous exposure to the stimulus will result in a seizure unless you are susceptible for that. Maybe genetically you are susceptible to a particular stimulus. What I meant to say is probably what overall reflex seizures mean is the physiological network itself for that particular stimulus is getting converted into a epileptogenic network. Now that conversion, that what they say is like in the case of hot water, he was telling like hyperthermic kindling. Now how that mechanism happens, that we don't know. But I didn't mean that if we go on listening to music, we'll get seizures. What I meant that probably what has been seen in reflex seizure is like initially you need a stimulus to trigger the seizure. But we have seen patients with reflex seizure also having spontaneous seizures parallelly. They can have reflex, and so probably the network has been triggered, and sometimes it needs stimulus, sometimes it doesn't. That's all I mean. I don't think so that we go and listening to music will come.
Okay, fine. No, it just was, I thought it was a very interesting point you made. So anyone has any more questions to any of these three people? It was a very wonderful session, and it's a very perplexing problem, but we often see it at least every week. You see a reflexation or a reflex epilepsy syndrome. So anyone who wants to make a comment or wants to make a question, there will be dropouts. There are only 27 out of the 81, but these 27 are the real people who wants to learn, as I always say. So anything you want to ask, three of them, you're welcome. See, I told you, no, all the three were so good that there are no questions this time. So I had to make some questions because there should be some discussion at the end. No? So it is very wonderful. All of you really made a good effort, and that is what I should say. Read everything about the topic and then coming in presenting and making a shabby presentation by not reading anything in 2 days. It can be made out very well. So all three of you needs a very big round of applause. Don't clap your hands and all. That's not what I meant, but really did a wonderful job. So this will be uploaded in YouTube, and try to get in more subscribers for a whole thing. That is what you people are not doing. Marketing is a big thing that you should do. This is a learning material that we are putting it up there, not something which is anything less. So I think that there are only 67 subscribers for the T20 or whatever Chitra alumni group. There should have been at least 5,000 subscribers by now. But so you are not doing your job. I'm sad to say, only I am doing my job. Uh, not blowing my trumpet, but I'm doing it. So I request all of you to be here on 29th. We have a very good speaker, and the speaker is one very senior person, Dr. Joshi, who is from Bangalore. Although he's a Keralite, he worked in Bangalore, I think. From Thrissur, he moved to Bangalore. And this person was suggested to me by Anand Kumar sir, and please be here. Because once in a while, you have to get detached from neurology and hear something sensible also. These fMRI and EEG fMRI and all will take you up until around 60 years. After that, you have to come to the rock bottom. So be here. I think most of you are not interested in the outside neurology talks. The audience is not that good as we wanted that to be. I want all the 36 PDFs to be there. Please be there. Ajit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So, very nice session.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Kala.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much.